In this episode of the Stamina Lab podcast, I spoke with Dr. Zain Hakeem. Dr. Hakeem is double board certified in internal medicine and pediatrics and founded the RiverRock Medical Clinic in Austin. In this episode, we talk about how to not just have a long lifespan, but also a long health span. We discussed the distinction between the two and how it alters the perception of his patient's relationship with the doctor. It's really a paradigm shift. We also talk about his nutritional pyramid and the 5 main things you need to focus on to keep your energy humming along. There are so many valuable takeaways in this episode. I know you'll get a lot out of this conversation, so let's get started. All right, welcome to the podcast, Dr.
Thanks.
Zain Hakeem.
Yes, great to be here.
All right, well, let's just get started. I wanted to get started by talking about the distinction between lifespan and health span, and how do you define that, and then also how do you communicate that distinction to your patients?
So lifespan, strictly speaking, is sort of just the absolute duration of life. So up until you die, that's the duration, right? That's lifespan. Now, health span is the portion of your lifespan in which you are functional. Now, you can get into the nitty-gritty definition of what constitutes function, but the intention of the concept is to delineate the point where you are enjoying a certain quality of life. Usually that means having enough function to be able to continue living independently and pursuing activities that you find meaningful.
And then when you say the function, it's just basically not, like you said, being independent is the main piece, right?
Yeah, I mean, certainly when I work in the hospital, that is ultimately what it seems to come down to is
mobility.
Mobility is, mobility, strength, those are the things that really impact health span pretty significantly, because at the moment you can no longer get up out of a chair, you can't go to the bathroom by yourself, you can't eat, cook for yourself, you can't leave the house. Those sorts of things really impact the quality of your life. You start to need caregivers, whether that's family or hired caregivers or a nursing home or whatever. And at that point, your self-perception of being healthy starts to go down, and the quality of life drops tremendously at that point.
And so our goal, obviously, with this, when people talk about living a long, have a big health lifespan, they really want a big health span, a long health span, and minimize that time where they're not able to take care of themselves.
In general, that's what people want, right? That they're healthy at a certain level. Maybe that goes up and down a little bit, and then ideally you drop dead one day.
Yeah,
right?
real fast
at 120, right?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
119 and 11 months you're out riding your bicycle, running a business, doing whatever, and then on your birthday you just drop dead one day, right? That's the ideal, right?
Right. But most people now assume with cancer and cognitive decline or metabolic health challenges that you're going to experience this long, slow death.
Decline.
Yeah, decline to death. Yeah.
I mean, there's a lot of ways to die. So certainly, there are certain illnesses, COPD for smokers, for instance, where it's progressive decline, but also marked by severe drops in function. You end up in the hospital. We get back a little bit, never quite back to where you were. And so there's these, severe drops, bit long recovery, not quite back to baseline, next drop, right? And you kind of decline that way. Cancer, you're going along, whatever, and then there's more of a progressive decline, assuming it's not treatable. Like I said, heart disease, there's a lot of different ways that can happen. I think the question always becomes, preferring more sudden death options, heart attack, blood clot, sudden cardiac death, whatever. I think historically what we've done is we've tried to address the most common causes of prolonged death. So cardiac disease, cancer, we have all these initiatives to fight cancer, fight Alzheimer's, fight whatever. And that approach is directed at this question. It's directed emotionally, I think culturally, we're directing it at this notion. If we knock off the top 3 most common ways to die slowly, can we expand lifespan and healthspan?
Healthspan, yeah. So what is health then? How would you define health?
Yeah, so I touched on it earlier. I think it's the capacity to pursue things you find meaningful.
At any stage of your life.
At any stage, yeah.
Right.
And I think the challenge there is often the reason people don't become healthy is they don't really have something meaningful to pursue that they are not able to pursue in their current state, right? If, you wake up, you drive to work, let's say you have an office job, you're sitting all day, you come back home, you sit down, you watch TV, you don't really need much more health to do what you're doing, right? Now, if all of a sudden you say, well, what I want is to climb a mountain, and that's the mission that my heart is sort of captivated by, well, now there's a reason to start doing things differently. And I think one thing I have found is that the general feeling of not feeling well is not motivating, ultimately. If that's what's pushing you, you don't end up taking the behaviors that you need to overcome that feeling.
So it's really having a reason for living, that having some values that you want to see played out in your life, have relationships you want to have in your life.
Yep.
It's having that purpose and meaning that helps create the motivation for the behaviors to have that long health span, and also then it creates that long health span.
Yeah, it's for me, it's almost definitional. Is if you find, when I'm working with patients to try to figure out their purpose or their meaning or whatever, the thought experiment I run in is like, look, what if I could offer you, we'll put you in a coma, put you on a ventilator, stick a needle into your brain, and we'll stimulate the pleasure center of your brain until you die, right? Would you take that option genuinely, right? Most people would not, right? And then the question, well, why not, right? Why not be a vegetable that's experiencing pleasure for as long as it lasts, and you won't know how long it lasts, so it doesn't matter, right? It's essentially infinite for you.
Or plugged into virtuality.
Sure, there's 1,000 versions of that. Right?
Yeah, that's the current zeitgeist on that, yeah.
But the ultimate reason is that we are driven toward meaning, and we recognize that would be a meaningless existence. No matter how pleasurable it was, it would not be meaningful, and we find meaning more important than pleasure.
So when you talk to your patients about this health span and lifespan, this purpose and values and meaning come up in your conversations, correct?
Oh, very directed. Yeah, it's difficult, I will say, because that to me is the most important part of my practice. It's a bit of a frame shift for patients. So I'm pushing the conversation, and to be fair, I haven't found the exact right framework to really get engagement, because I think when people come to the doctor, they're like, and this touches on exactly what we're talking about, is people come to the doctor with a problem to solve. And in any space, there are problems to solve and opportunities to pursue, and certainly in the realm of health, but I think this is true in general, is when you pursue opportunities, problems often get solved in passing. If you're pre-diabetic or diabetic, whatever, and we say, well, what if we can address that as a problem. We could prescribe medication, we can, prescribe weight loss, et cetera, or we can say, well, what project would you want to take on, climbing a mountain, whatever, where you need to have better muscular strength, you need to have a better VO2 max, right? You need mobility, you need endurance. If you gain all of those things, your diabetes is being addressed in passing. Right? And it's a much more motivating method of addressing diabetes. Which I do prescribe. It's not like I don't, right? But frankly, that only takes you so far, and it's not very far.
That really is interesting, because it falls in line with what when we do our coaching at Stamina Lab. We focus on solution-focused coaching, which is what difference is it going to make, or what do you want to do instead, and the root cause analysis. The root cause doesn't have much of a value to. I mean, it does, but for a lot of things, just focusing on what do you want to do instead, and what difference will that make, those questions get you going in that direction, and the problems become solved because of the direction. You can't break a bad habit. Essentially, you're just trying to replace it with things that are helping you and getting you to the values and dreams and goals that you want to have.
Yeah.
It's the same philosophy.
Yeah, exactly. And I think more and more people are starting to realize that, negative focus is what I call it. Problem solving.
Yeah.
Solves problems, right? And that leaves you in a vacuum, in a void of, well, what now? Okay. I mean, imagine, okay, let's say we had a pill that cured diabetes, right? It's like, which we sort of do, bariatric surgery, right?
Yeah.
It's like, okay, you can get the bariatric surgery, and then what? How has your life improved, right? Theoretically, you've expanded your lifespan, maybe your health span. Questionable.
Right.
Right? But, and then what? Right? And the then what always becomes pursuit of meaning. And so if we just leap to that, we can sort of skip all the middle part, right? It'll happen anyway, and we'll get there, and that to me is real health span. If you spend from whatever age you are now to the moment you die really feeling possessed that you were doing meaningful things, that what you were doing mattered fundamentally, I think that's health. I think
that is health.
And so, you don't need to fix your diabetes first. You need to do that first. And then you will end up fixing your diabetes because it's in your way. Right? All your problems are then in the way of what you want to do. And that's what provides the motivation to get them out of the way. Yeah. And I think that's a better solution.
Well, no, I think that it applies. It applies a lot of challenges. Is that, okay, now we've gone back and we've addressed that when you were a child, your brother took your Tonka truck, and that's, some now we've solved the root cause of that. Now what? Mm-hmm. Well, why don't we just skip that whole time where we have to go back and figure that out and just go to the now what? Yep. And start moving forward on that. That's fantastic.
And it's, in this conversation, obviously, we're emphasizing the growth aspect because it is underemphasized.
Right.
Globally. Certainly, problem solving helps many people, right? I have XYZ issue, I have a torn ACL. Okay, you know what?
We have to fix that.
Yeah, we fix the problem, right? I think that where we run into trouble is when we want to grow and we try to address growth using problem-solving methods. Is we try to say, well, let me do a ton of lab work, right? And just find whichever value is off and then attach my focus to that so that now there's a problem for me to solve. Right? Whereas the problem to solve is why are you solving problems?
Well, I think that it'd be important for the listeners to understand you have a unique kind of practice. And so if you could describe a little bit about how that practice works and because that's where we really want to talk to you, because it is a unique type of practice and it's kind of, I think, more emblematic of the direction we should be moving with our relationship with the doctor, which, as you said, is when people come in, it's kind of a paradigm shift, and they're like, wait, this relationship is supposed to be like this, but this relationship is like this.
That's the hardest part of my practice, is getting that shift, because people still, even people who know me, and I get to be quite close, I would say, for a doctor. Like, I love the quote from Patch Adams, when did a doctor become more than a trusted and learned friend? Right? Yeah. And so in many ways, I am trying to move it back, especially, you talk to people about the meaning of their lives, and you end up pretty close pretty quick. Yeah. So I think that the practice is structured around this notion. The structure I found that works best so far is no insurance, yearly membership model. It's $11,000 and change per year per person. Little discount for couples, $20,000 a year. Probably this will have to go up soon, actually. Just pragmatics. But what that allows is, let's take money off the table, and all my visits are an hour long. I have, I'm continually investing in online resources. I have a Google chat space where patients is the primary place where people chat. We can invite ancillary health personnel. We can invite your coach in. So it's a private space where, if you want, if the patient wants, their health team can all kind of gather and kind of discuss everything there, right? Sort of a Slack channel for their health. Stuff like that's just not possible in an insurance model, right?
Yeah, and this is obviously it's not for everyone because of the price point, but
Sure.
but the idea is that this is a model that we want to try to push forward, so that could potentially trickle down to
I will say, and I don't.
I'm trying to be optimistic.
No, I totally. I will say I don't talk about that much, probably because it's so far away, and probably sounds a little bit grandiose, but a large part of what I'm doing is as I engage with patients and I say, okay, let's try and find meaning and purpose, right? I started that several years ago now. I've had these conversations over and over with a fair wide range of patients, plus friends, family, et cetera, et cetera. I'm starting to algorithmize that process. I'm watching how I have that conversation, which questions trigger the right thought pattern, right? And finding patterns, meta patterns. So right now, what I found is there's about 8 categories of things that people find meaningful, right? We're human. It's not that many, right? Now, the implementation can be very unique, but, the categories broadly are
joy, love, happiness.
So I mean,
that's the ultimate.
Well, those may be the responses to. I'll tell you the categories. The categories I found, if I can remember them all. Intimacy, which is a one-on-one seeing and being seen relationship. Family, which is different because that's a participatory belonging relationship, but specifically with people you know. Community, which is a belonging relationship on the basis of a shared value, often and usually with people you don't know. So that's a different experience. Creative expression, or expressing your soul. If you're an artist and you have an artist's heart, you will wither and die without expressing your soul, right? Tinkering, making, and building. So business people, carpenters, people that just find joy in tinkering at stuff. Collecting beautiful experiences. People who just really love going out and they remember that meal, right? We were on the terrace overlooking the beach, and just the memory of that is deeply meaningful to them. How many we got here? Competition. There is a subset of people where just winning is deeply meaningful. Just stacking up points, right? All men so far. But yeah, it doesn't really matter. It's interesting. That was a recent addition because I had a couple people who I was trying to shoehorn them into a different category, and really at the end of the day, it was just like, no, I just want the status. I just want to whatever, right? Shoot, I'm missing one. It'll come to me. But just to give you an idea, those categories of things in general, people need at least 3 in order to have a full life. We get unbalanced. Classic example I give is motherhood, right? So many mothers are subsumed by the role of one of those categories, and it is deeply meaningful, but they end up feeling a bit flat as a person, right? Actually, very intense CEOs and business people have the same issue, right? Businessmen often get pulled in, I am just CEO, that's all I am, right? And they end up feeling rather flat. So I say 1 is a trap, 2 is a dilemma, and 3 is freedom, right?
Okay.
You need a minimum of 3 sources of meaning that you are actively pursuing in order to feel like a well-rounded person, that you are living a meaningful life. And that's where kind of the magic happens. Now, many people pursue more than that.
Yeah, no, I would say I can see it. And now in my life, at 51 years old, I can see myself in nearly almost all of those categories.
Sure.
Yeah, I mean, even from tinkering to artistry to even to just wanting to win.
Yeah.
But also needing community and intimacy and that type of those type of ones. And I know that when I started my first company when I was 25 years old, I was like, okay, this is everything. And I often talk about to young entrepreneurs about this, is that if you put your whole identity in this company, it's driving it's fine. You're going to do well for a bit, but you're going to hit a wall at some point.
Totally.
And which I totally did. And I knew the things that I needed to do. So I just I started going back to the competing in my races.
Yep.
Like, okay, that gave me another thing to be strong about. Doubling down on your family and your friends. But when it was all about the business, yeah, it worked well for a while, and still it didn't.
Sure.
Because it was that one singular approach.
Yep. And I will say, sorry, and making your mark on the world is the one I forgot.
Okay, making your mark. Okay,
yeah, so impacting the world in some way,
and that's even goes back to from let's bring it back to me again. When the company I was, I didn't fully embody how to make that impact on the world with the company. It was just making money, and so even still, it was like what was the first thing you called it when you were just have one is
trap.
It's a trap. Yeah, it's a trap.
Yep.
It's a trap, as they say in Star Wars.
That's right. No, and I will say the other thing that there are eras in our lives. When you're a young man, yes, you are pursuing competition status more heavily. You're pursuing the money as a marker of the game, right?
And
so
it attracts other
totally
your mate.
So then you're also pursuing intimacy there, right? That's also part of the thing going on. Now, certainly, a lot of men feel very viscerally the shift when they move from wanting to compete heavily to wanting to build a family. That is a big moment, right? And what has shifted is you've moved into a new era of meaning, and we have those in our lives. As my father's gotten older, the value of sort of giving advice and passing on what he's learned, something he finds deeply meaningful. Now, when he was 20, that wasn't a big deal, right? Like, that's not something he really was actively fulfilled by, right? But when his kids are able to listen to, hey, yeah, this was my experience, this is what I learned, this is what I've been through, take that forward with you, now it's very meaningful for us to receive that from him, for both sides.
Right.
But, yeah.
So that's interesting. So those what did you call it? What are the
categories of meaning.
Categories of meaning. So those categories of meaning, if you don't have all of them, or if you anything, it's okay.
Totally, yeah.
It's okay.
I'm not an artist.
Right.
I mean, I expressing my creative soul is not a huge part of my existence.
Well, you have a podcast, so that you are creating.
Well, again, that's actually, so I am huge in tinkering.
Yeah. Okay.
Right?
So that's a tinkering.
That's why I've kind of distinguished them is the emotional experience of creating art, and I tend to date artists, so
yeah. Well, that's
I'm very
probably to
drawn
balance
to
that out, right?
Sure, totally. I'm very drawn to that for that reason, right? But I have noticed it is a demonstrably different experience of meaning, rather than the tinkering of building a business or carpentry or which I do all of the podcasting, those kinds of things, right? Yeah, it's just so different.
Well, one of the other things I really was interested in and looking at your work and listening to your podcast is you have an interesting take on a nutritional pyramid.
Sure.
And what I thought was so interesting about it was that you put the social connection at a base level. It was not the first one, but it was the second one, I believe.
Yep.
The second one, base level. And I thought that connects to behavior design very much, and how you change behavior is putting yourself with people that are already in that area of values and meaning that you want to be in, and that makes everything so much easier, infinitely easier when you do that. And so I was really curious if you could talk a little bit about this pyramid and the particularly the first 5 of them, and I have a couple questions about the other ones, but so let's start there, because I think those are going to be the most interesting, useful for the audience. Totally,
yeah. So the first one is removing toxins, right? It's something I take from Nassim Taleb in his work Anti-Fragile is the via negativa. His first question is, what should I remove, right? High fructose corn syrup, trans fats, tobacco, quercetin, whatever, basic level stuff, like try to remove that, right? The next level is, as you mentioned, is social and connective relational, right? I'm trying to get Julianne Holstad on my podcast. She's one of the foremost researchers on loneliness, and is convincingly building a case that loneliness is as damaging to health as cigarettes, right? It's a profoundly negative effect on our health. By contrast, there's great evidence that people with very good social connections can can defy the odds on smoking, diabetes, overweight, all these things. There's great blue zones. All the data from those areas indicate that it's such a protective effect that it almost trumps a lot of other nonsense.
Totally.
Right?
That was what I found so interesting. This is probably one of the things that got me down this journey early on was interested in the fact when these long longitudinal studies for people that are living into their hundreds, they all drink alcohol, and I was like, okay, well, if you go to the first one, take away toxins.
Yep.
Obviously, alcohol should be taken away from the program. And the alcohol got people together and to community, and that trumped by far the toxin part of the alcohol, and that still blows my mind.
Yep. Alcohol is clearly a toxin.
Yeah.
It's carcinogen. I think the pure biological statement is there is no lower limit of safe dosing.
Right.
Right. However, it does have, in many cases, especially, and I think there's cultural determinants of this, to be fair, but it does have social aspects, and in those social aspects, I think that's part of why so many cultures still drink, right? Is
to get you together.
Yeah, I mean, it to the degree that it promotes pro-social behavior, I think we would culturally realize that there's negatives and there's positives, and the balance is not clear maybe between them, but if it is used pro-socially, and not to excess,
right, yeah,
then,
drink responsible people, and do it socially if you do.
Yeah, I mean, certainly you can overdo, right, and there is a subset of the population where I think even they did some cool studies on I think it was, I don't know if it's chimps or monkeys, but yeah, there's just a fraction of them that the first time they were exposed to alcohol, they just couldn't stop, right? And just, it just seems to be some combination of factors that, whether it's genetic or cultural or exposure, what the deal is, that even in animals, there's a certain fraction where just the appeal of extreme use is somewhat irresistible. But for many other people, you recognize that it's a toxin, but to the degree that it is so are all medicines, right? And so it's like, to the degree that it is useful, you can use the toxin below its dose and try to get pro-social benefits out of it.
Okay, so we have removing the toxins is the most important thing.
Correct.
And then social relationships.
One quick comment on that too is I think we are built to socialize around food.
Right.
I think from a tribal society, whatever, we interact around food. We gather for, what's the first thing you do when you ask a girl on a date, right? You say, hey, would you have dinner, right? It's the offer of food, the offer that is so deeply built into who we are as a species. I think that trying to separate food from culture is nearly impossible.
Right.
So the next one, if I recall, was just accountability and tracking was the next one.
Okay.
And there I think that we are all subject to self-delusion, right? I mentioned in the video, I lift, I work out pretty hard, and there is often a temptation to say, well, I probably just gained muscle, right? The scale's going up, right? But if I don't get a DEXA scan to check myself, no, actually, oops, it was all fat, and you were fooling yourself, and we're all subject to that. So I think creating, even the scale itself, right? So many people are afraid to look at it. Well, part of it, because it is an objective reference to say, hey, you need to look at reality, not live in your imaginary world in your head.
I prefer the delusion.
Yeah, I mean, and it's challenging to live that way, to be in contact with reality, but that's also where all the meaning is. That we talked about VR, you talked about part of the reason those are not meaningful experiences is because they are not in contact with reality, and that the absence of reality contact strips meaning out of the experience.
So right, and so I'm very interested in the measuring part of it. Obviously, I've got two trackers on my body right now. I track. I do the DEXA scan once or twice a year, and and the scale every morning. Obviously, there's the weight number, but there's also the muscle mass number and the body fat number. There's all three. Help me with not getting obsessed about either of the numbers because they all are in concert with each other. And there's also the reality that if you're tracking something, specifically with sleep, when you track sleep, one of the things that we tell our clients is to check in with yourself before you check in with what your sleep data says. Mm-hmm. Like, how do you feel? That's the first thing, to the more the introspective type of being, and then looking at the data over time. And I think that's one of the things where obviously I'm kind of a commercial for the coaching, but being able to teach people how to read this data a bit. And probably and obviously for you and your practice, that's a key part of it, because individuals are not data scientists. We don't know what all these metrics mean. And some of these apps and wearables throw a ton of data at you. And so trying to be able to manage that, and even on athletic performance, like the day of a race, I'm like, I do not want to see my data or my readiness score, because I'm like, already I'm trying to keep all negative thoughts out of my brain. And so when I'm at some point in the race where the negative thoughts are starting to creep in, I'm like, I don't also have to remember, I'm like, ooh, but that readiness score was below than what I would have wanted, and maybe that's why I'm starting to get tired. You want to know those negative thoughts. So I guess my question is, how do you balance the data and accountability with also, your own introception and not getting too anxious or caught up with that data?
It's challenging. I think one of the big issues is we have never had this much data before about ourselves. And even medically, we're not prepared for the amount of noise filtering that is required. Most data is noise. Mm-hmm. Finding the signal in that noise requires a different mental approach than if you're getting blood work once a year. Right? Because the level of fine-grained data is much higher, but the meaningfulness of that data is less, because any given data point is less reflective of your health than the summation of them. And so learning to learning to look at trends rather than data points, I think that's one of the big switches. And then figuring out, well, which trends. There's so I'm borrowing a lot from Nassim Taleb these days, which he's a great, I love his books.
It's a great Anti-Fragile. We'll put it in the show notes.
Totally. But he makes the point that you could have a stock that was getting an 8% return, which is a great return, right, over the course of a year. And if you looked at it on an hourly basis, right, there would be a 49-point-something% chance it went down and a 51% or 50-point-something% chance it went up, right? Humans typically process negative data about 3 times more heavily than positive data, so you would feel awful about a stock that was performing very well, right? And there would be a mismatch between your internal experience and the reality. Now, if you only looked at that stock once a month, you would have 1 month where it was down and 12 months where it was up, and you would be more correctly calibrated to what your stock was actually doing, right? So learning to step back from the data and look at the bigger trends, and then each type of data requires a different level of step back. So what is the correct amount of step back on a continuous glucose monitor? Do I look at the trends over the month? Do I look at the trends over the week? Certainly I think looking at trends over a day is probably not wise, right? Or certainly smaller than that, right? I get people that are really into, well, I ate
one meal,
this was the result, XYZ, right? So I think that those are somewhat problematic. On the other hand, I have a patient who is using a CGM to do a series of essentially oral glucose tolerance tests.
Experiments?
And we bought him some glucose online, and he measures out 75 grams and replicates an oral glucose tolerance test, every 2 weeks on different days at different times, different workout patterns, XYZ, to see, well, what really is, because he's kind of on the edge of metabolic issues, like how far along are you? Whereas in a lab, we can only do that once for practical purposes, right? So the data does, I mean, or these devices do allow gathering very useful data if used appropriately. Appropriately, we're still working out what that means. You gave the example of sleep. I think that's another one where, you can use that in a positive way or in a negative way, right? To say, okay, I mean, I've got patients who are like, I didn't sleep at all. And I'm like, well, you need a sleep tracker because you did, right? You may not have slept as much as you want or as high quality as you want, but the psychological reaction to the negative feeling of being fatigued is shifting you into delusion, and we need a reality check, right? How much did you sleep? Oh, I only slept 1 hour. Okay, that's not nearly enough. That's why you're fatigued. Totally agree. But if we start with I didn't sleep at all for the last month, I can't do anything with that because it's divorced from reality, right? Now, 1 hour is awful, and you will feel awful, but it's also not zero, and we need to figure out what's going on, and it gives us a way to track.
Right. It's a start of a conversation. The data is more of a start of a conversation.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah. And so, okay, now we have the first piece is, again, take away the toxins. Then we have the social connection with our food.
Tracking.
And then tracking. And then what's next?
Then I put macros.
Okay.
For me, macros in general, and by the way, I've been through, I was keto for 2 years. I have done prolonged fasting, intermittent fasting, OMAD. I've experimented with all these things. As those diets have become more popular, better and better studies have come out. The studies seem to indicate that if you match calories, there's no difference, right? So whether you're keto or you're vegan or you're whatever, if you match calories and protein content, ultimately in terms of weight loss, weight gain, muscle mass, etc., it shakes out the same, right? The reason I emphasize that is I think it's very easy to get caught up in an ideology when in fact that is a taste preference that allows you to tolerate restricting your calories or hitting certain protein targets or whatever, right? It's important to know that what you're doing is actually caloric, not ideological.
So match calories, can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So if you take someone and you put them on a low-carb keto diet or a low-fat diet, for instance, but you give them standard meals, and you put them in a controlled environment for, say, 2 weeks or 3 weeks, right? And all they eat are those meals. One is keto, one is, high-carb, low-fat, but the calories in the meals are matched. It's the same number of calories. The people have the same response in terms of their weight gain or loss.
Oh, interesting.
Right?
Interesting.
And so things are more complicated than that. And we'll get into that in a second. But core concept, overall, there is no difference between those. Now, next layer of complication. Many people in our society have metabolic dysfunctions.
Yeah.
Right? What that means is, in an ideal person, carbs and fat should both be just a source of energy. And essentially, your body should be able to switch back and forth easily and not have an issue, right? With the prevalent metabolic dysfunctions, for a variety of reasons, that switching may not be on point, and having a period where you are low carb, 3 months, 6 months, or fasting regularly for 48 hours, something like that, or zone 2 training, actually, that's the other one. So 4 hours of zone 2 training a week broken up into 1 hour segments. Any of those things or any combination of those things can improve the metabolic dysfunction that then will allow you to treat carbs and fats equally, and you can go back to just a pure calorie focus, right?
Got it.
So that's part of it. The next layer up from there is in terms of calories out, right? Calories out is actually a really tricky part of the equation. Sorry, brief on calories into, there's so much allowance there's like 20% allowance for calorie fluctuation in published numbers. So 100 calories could be anywhere from 80 to 120, and that can start to matter, right? which gets back, which is why I put accountability and tracking below as more important, is that you could be hitting your calorie targets exactly right, but the food manufacturer lied to you and is fudging the numbers in a particular direction, and you're gaining weight even though you're under calories, right?
So it's the outcome. The outcome is what the data is.
Correct.
So, yeah.
Correct. So the outcome is saying, well, and you say, well, the problem is the data is all flawed, right? Same for calories out. Great example is swimmers, right? Is they lose so much heat to the water that their calorie intake has to be insane, right? But it's not the exercise; it's the heat loss, and that's one of those things we don't account for, right? Same for the thermic effect of food, is that it takes a certain amount of energy to digest food, and depending on what food you eat, some food takes more energy to digest. Third factor is NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis. It's the general fidgeting that we all do, shifting, whatever, this and that, and as I shift now, yeah. But in general, when you calorie restrict, you will naturally fidget less, so you will subconsciously drop your activity levels. When you're calorie restricted, right? So the balance is not at all trivial to achieve. However, I think that people psychologically are better able to maintain sufficient calorie deficit with different methods individual to the person. Some people say, well, the easiest way for me to restrict my calories sufficiently is to only eat meat, right? Or to only eat between 6 p.m. and 9 p.m., right? And if I limit myself to those hours, then pragmatically, I will be in a calorie deficit. But it's just important to know that at the end of the day, you need to be hitting your protein targets. If you're trying to gain muscle, you need rough figure, again, variance, but rough figure is a gram per centimeter of height, right? And you need to be hitting your total calorie targets. And those are the bigger factors.
Right, and that's again continues to go back, and I want to talk about this a little bit more later. But the personalized medicine and your personalized nutrition, it's your environment, it's the people around you, it's what's your values and purpose and mission, what's your tastes. All these factors come in, and those are all okay, and that's why it's you that is
absolutely
is the experiment. You're the one that has to experiment,
and that's why you need that's why I put tracking and accountability so low on the or so important on the pyramid, is that because it has to be individualized, you have to have some contact with checking in, right? Because what works for someone else may not work for you. Hey, I like this protein bar and you like that protein bar. Well, this manufacturer's fudging the numbers and that one's not. So even though the numbers are the same, the reality may be different, and I may end up gaining weight and you may end up losing weight. And so without that double check, you can't account for all the different factors. Yeah,
so the measuring and experimentation is the key.
Yep.
Okay, so now we've gone up from taking away the toxins. We've had the social aspect in there. We've done the measurements. Then we have the macros.
Correct.
What's next?
What did I put next? I think I put I'm forgetting my own food pyramid here.
What I think it was around
satiety and palatability was
that
next?
So, yeah.
So yes, and I think the variability was the one after that. So satiety and palatability, I think, was next.
Yep.
And that touches exactly on what so perfect segue, right? Is that's an individual factor. What food do you like? And if I try to go vegan long term, I will not do well, right? And more to the point, I won't do it, right?
You won't do it, and that goes. That's basic behavior design is if you want to do something, make it easy and something you enjoy.
Yes, and there is a point at which you're not going to tolerate feeling hungry all the time for very long, right? You just won't. You'll do that for short periods with a lot of willpower and a lot of support. You won't do that long term. It's not a long term solution. So whatever solution you come up with on an individual level has to be filling and be palatably satiating, meaning it's food you enjoy as well as food that is filling. So it satisfies your hunger and your desire for hedonic pleasure, right? And And so, yeah, there's both the actual satiety and the hedonic satiety
Right.
that have to be satisfied by whatever plan you implement. And so
Okay.
that's the next one.
All right. After that, then what do we move to?
Variability. So again, it's a lab idea. I suspect there is not a single unique ideal diet, even for an individual. I suspect that if you're trying to optimize your diet further, it should change over time. So 1 month you should be heavier on meat, another month maybe heavier on vegetables. It should fluctuate over the year. Certainly we evolved in an environment where food availability shifted.
Seasonality.
Yep, seasonality, right. And so if we're really trying to then take the next level of optimization, and I put quite a gap between satiety and tolerability and variability, right? Those first ones that I named.
Yeah, those are the first 5.
Yeah, those are just, the real critical. You're getting 90% of the benefits of diet at that point, right? You take the next step up, maybe you're getting 95, right? And that I think is variance over time, is deliberately, intentionally fasting, right? Saying, okay, I'm going to, for 48 hours, no calories, and deliberately, intentionally feasting is that birthdays, Christmas.
I like this part.
Those, again, now you're feeding the social aspects, right? And saying, hey, yeah, you know what? I'm going to really consume 10,000 calories today or 6,000 calories, whatever it is, right? And then, then you have periods where you're at 0, right? So you're broadening. If you look at the total caloric intake per day, you should have a wider bell curve rather than a narrower one, right?
And go ahead.
No, and oddly, I mean, and I'm still fleshing this idea out, but I think that's also true for protein, right? As much as I talk about hitting your protein targets, I do think that if you look at the bell curve of total protein consumed per day, yes, the average should hit a gram per centimeter, but I actually think you should have a slightly wider bell curve rather than a narrow one.
Yeah, I really like this aspect of the variability. I mean, one, I grew up in a rural area near lots of farmland, so we would get some really great vegetables, and we have a lot in the August time period, September time period, where lots of things be coming from the harvest. The corn was fantastic. It was coming from the farm to the table within a few hours, and still can't beat that. Sure. And so, but that didn't come every year. That didn't come all the time. So when that came, that you were over-indexing on all the stuff that was coming out of our garden. And we had tons of zucchini. We're having zucchini there every night because we have all these zucchinis we have to have.
Yeah, totally.
And the other thing that was interesting, though, is when we have these social functions, you have the family reunion, you have the friend reunion, you have the Thanksgiving or something. That's a time to enjoy the social aspect of it and gorge a little bit, because you're going to balance it out with some fasting time periods or different time periods, because so many people go into those moments with such anxiety and stress about it, and really there's something amazing about the social aspect of that you want to embrace and fully.
Totally.
For the Healthspan. Yeah,
and that's the other reason I kind of put it in a pyramid in terms of trying to rank from more important to less important, bottom to top. In that, yes, variability is important. However, variability requires quite a bit of psychological attention. And if you are trading off trying to pay attention to something, and then you're not hitting your macro targets, right, over the course of a month or the year, then you've put the cart before the horse. One of the strategies of hitting macro targets is repetitive eating. Pick meals you like, that you enjoy, that are filling, and just eat those over and over. Then you don't have to think about it, right? And on a day-to-day basis, if you're pursuing other sources of meaning, you may not want the psychological overhead of intentionally trying to vary things. Now, if you've already mastered that, then maybe you can take on variance.
Got it. Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
And so, yes.
That's why it has to go up you have to go up the pyramid.
That's the intention.
Got it. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It becomes even more clear if we go one step up, right, which is food quality and sourcing. I'm a big fan of these ideas. I think they're great. You mentioned like the corn off your farm. It's never going to be as good, right? You can make ecological arguments. You can. I loved the omnivore's dilemma. Phenomenal exploration of that kind of food chain kind of concept. But if you are paying attention to food sourcing at the expense of your macros, you've put the cart before the horse, right? If you're paying attention to food sourcing to the point where I won't go eat at the same places my friends like to eat, you put the cart before the horse, because now you're sacrificing, you're eating alone all the time,
right,
in order to eat this, super high quality grass-fed thing that now, if you can gather a group of friends who also like to eat that way, that's a different story, right?
Right.
But if you are truly sacrificing, if you're eating alone there, you've put the cart before the horse. And so that's why my intention is, and not perfectly, right? That was the other thing I tried to emphasize in the thing is, hit your macros 85% of the time, right? Eat with people 85% of the time. It's fine. 15% variance on any of these things. Nobody expects perfection before you move on to the next consideration.
Right. That makes sense.
But if you're missing your macros 80% of if you're missing your macros 80% of the time, you're only hitting them 20% of the time, work on that before you start working on food quality.
And we'll put this triangle in the show notes, because I think this is great for people to see. Because at the top of it, and I want to move on, because I could geek out on this forever. But at the top of it, you have the supplements, and I was surprised how little you put value on supplements in this paradigm. So, tell a little bit about that.
Yeah, so I think the reality is, and something I push back pretty hard on my channel, is how many supplements have a well-designed placebo-controlled randomized trial. And if you don't, then you're guessing. And we see that even outside of the supplement world, even in the medical world. One of the videos I put out was on the Orbita trial, right? And I called that storytelling versus evidence. Mm-hmm. And we're talking about people that had a known 70% blockage in an artery of their heart, chest pain that was consistent with cardiac pain with activity, got better with rest. And half of them, they went in and put a stent, and half of them, they went in, didn't put a stent, just looked at it, and it was a sham procedure where they mimicked putting a stent in without actually putting a stent in, and there was no difference between the groups, right? The power of placebo is phenomenal. And so if you cannot show me a randomized controlled, placebo-controlled trial, it's just, and none of the supplements have that. Right. It's essentially none. Right?
But to your argument, then, what if the supplement is giving me a placebo effect?
Yeah. So, and I'm totally fine with that unless there are possible known harms, and that's kind of one of the issues. And
it's expensive.
Sure, cost is a harm on some level, but even there's a study indicating that vitamin E supplementation increases mortality. Right. We don't really know what's safe either. That's the other thing. Is something taken consistently over time, you do need a body of work showing safety. So I think creatine has that. I think caffeine has that. But not many things have that body of work truly indicating that long-term supplementation is safe.
So
caveat to that. Things like, I absolutely, there are things that I do where I'm not even sure whether it's a placebo effect or not. So I have people come in for muscle aches, muscle pains, and we'll do an IV with magnesium. Now, theoretically, magnesium is a muscle relaxant.
Right.
We see that in very high doses in pregnant women, right? We give them like 4,000, 8,000 milligrams at a time, and they get kind of like loose and floppy, right? Now, it does reliably, in my patients, seem to improve their muscle spasm or their back pain or their whatever. Now, is that a placebo effect? Could be, right? But magnesium's L50, the dose that you have to give in order to kill half of people, is insane. It's many grams per kilogram, and so the safety profile on magnesium is so robust that I feel comfortable using it as a unknown placebo.
And we often that's one of the few supplements that we use to help people with sleep challenges is to prescribe or offer that as an option, especially if you're trying to get off of actual sleeping prescribed sleeping medicine, which that we do know has long-term mortality impacts.
Yep.
So that's why I was interested and curious about where you put these supplements on there.
Yeah, no, I mean, I guess that's kind of the thing is if I have to choose a supplement, I choose one that has a robust safety profile, a body of work indicating safety, and try to avoid things that I know are, again, remove toxins, right? And so
Right. So, staying with the sleep process, how do you fit sleep and recovery into your practice and into your own individual practice?
Um,
Your
I,
medical practice, how do you fit in your medical practice, and then how do you?
yeah, yeah. Sleep and recovery is a big challenge. I think many of my patients are struggling with it. I think one of the things I try to work with, and I'll plus or minus success, I will say, is significant parts of sleep issues are anxiety. And that can be, some of that is anxiety about, I have to, I have a job at 9 a.m. and I have to wake up. And genetically, there's good evidence that our sleep schedules are genetically determined, and genetically, I'm a night owl. So I like to I don't get sleepy until 3 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that's a problem. You're going to be chronically sleep deprived. Your job starts at 9 a.m. And working with that is going to be challenging. There's just a conflict between your biology and the culture, right? By contrast, other people, I think, struggle with sleep issues because of a lack of meaning. That's something I see a lot, right? Where someone feels purposeless, feels adrift, right? You see this a lot in hospitals, by the way, in that I think the worst part about hospitals and the way we practice hospital medicine, we do a phenomenal job in many ways. It is very boring. The patient is sitting in a room, often too weak or unable to move, often in pain or short of breath or struggling in some way, often alone. And all they have to do is to dwell on how much it sucks. And so it sucks a lot more than it needs to. There doesn't need to be as much suffering in hospitals as there is. But, no insurer is going to pay for entertainment.
Right.
There's a TV in the room, but, if you don't like Howdy Doody, then that's...
And lighting.
It's oh, yeah, no, okay. There are many environmental... sorry, I didn't mean to only focus on that. Absolutely. Fluorescent lighting timing, all of those things matter. ICU psychosis is a known effect because most ICUs don't have window access. And so patients lose track of time of day because it's always fluorescently lit.
Therefore, the circadian clock is completely
off. Yeah, yeah. And so they literally go psychotic, and the solution is to move them out of the ICU.
So how do you yourself manage your sleep and recovery? What's your process?
I will admit that I have been blessed in many ways.
Okay.
I've really not, knock on wood, very grateful, not struggled much with sleep issues. But I will say partly that is because I have been sufficiently consumed by purpose that if I only sleep an hour a night, it doesn't bother me. I'm tired for, residency, obviously you're very sleep deprived, XYZ, never bothered me. It was like, okay, I slept 2 hours, but I'm tired for the first hour, and then I'm so captivated by what I'm doing that I don't notice that I'm tired. And that's kind of what I'm saying, is that if you are so captivated by your life, you may be fatigued. You may be, I certainly was performing less well than I perform well rested, but I didn't notice because I was performing as well as I possibly could, and I was captivated by that engagement, by the challenge of pushing myself to engage as well as I could under any circumstances, right? I also think that even when I go stretches, and it happens to everyone, right? There are stretches of time where for a week I just can't sleep. Sleep an hour or 2 hours here or there or whatever, up and out, disturbed sleep for whatever reason. I think part of the reason I'm relatively, hopefully, and I have no data on this is pure storytelling, so let's move out of the scientific field. But the storytelling I think that I tell myself is because I shrug it off. I'm like, it'll get better. It's fine, right? My body will figure it out. I don't try to pathologize it. I don't start immediately looking into, well, what did I eat? Did I exercise differently? Did I, I may say like, okay, am I anxious about something? Am I, something going on? I keep a journal by the bed because sometimes thoughts keep me up.
Sure.
And just writing them down, again, knowing myself, right? I'm such a tinkerer that one of my fears is to lose a great idea, right? So if I wake up in the night and I'm like, oh man, that would be a great way to help patient, or that patient, I need to look that up. I keep something by the bed to write it down, without a screen, to just scribble that down, and then I'm very comfortable to just say, well, I'll go read, I'll go work on. If I'm that consumed by the idea, I'll get up and go work on it, right? And maybe I don't need to sleep that much this week. Again, variability, right? Is like if I look at my sleep over the year, I probably do pretty well. I probably hit that 7-8 hour mark over on a year basis. But there are weeks I don't.
I think that's a very important message for people who are struggling to sleep. You obviously have really good sleep confidence, and the fact that when you don't get good sleep, your body will adjust. You'll get tired eventually, and you'll sleep really well. And one night of sleep is not going to. You might be tired. You might not. You're like you said, you're not going to be performing at your absolute 100% best, but that's okay.
Yeah.
I mean, and I think that's really important message for everybody to take away.
And the SEAL teams, medical residents, there are values in learning how to perform when you're not at your best, to perform to a high standard, right? And I think socially we recognize that, okay, yeah, we need a cadre of people who are ready and willing, not happy, but ready and willing to perform when conditions aren't optimal, right?
Yeah. So I have one last question for you, and because I have a ton of questions for you, but we'll have to do this again sometime.
Sure.
But if you have one piece of advice for people who want to try to improve their health span, what would you say?
I think my number one for most people is to optimize the quality of their relationships. And if that's family for you, that's awesome. If it's community for you, that's awesome. If it's intimacy for you, that's awesome. But figuring that out, I think, will have a bigger impact than almost anything else you can do. And the reason we don't talk about it is that it's hard to measure. And so we've gotten obsessed with it. It reminds me of the old joke is, a drunk's lost his keys and he's searching under the area of the street light. So you ask him, well, why are you searching only here? And he said, well, that's where the light is, right? And I think that's what we're doing in health pursuits is we can measure certain things and we only try to optimize the things we can measure, right? When we could measure cholesterol, we created an entire industry around optimizing your cholesterol numbers. They were never that predictive. They were never that good of a metric. But that's what we had a lab test for, right? And I think as we move into sleep tracking, we move into all these other things, we'll start to improve those things. But until we figure out a way to, and I'm working on it to be totally fair, but until we find a way to really create a measurement of community, family, intimacy, I think we will undervalue the degree to which that improves your health.
Oh, that's a fantastic place to wrap up. Thank you, Zain, for being here.
My pleasure.
If someone wants to reach out to you, where should they look to find you?
Number one, I'm a little bit old school, to be totally honest. So my email address is the letter Z like zebra, at RiverRockMedical.com. That's probably the easiest. I am on Twitter at Dr. Zain Hakeem, occasionally, not that often. And of course, the YouTube channel is youtube.com/@RiverRockMedical.
All right. Thank you for being on the show.
My pleasure.
All right. Thank you for everyone listening. Me. Yeah. All right. Sounds good. Welcome to the newest episode of Stamina Lab, hosted by me, Glenn Lubert. If you're ready to upgrade your performance, achieve mental clarity, and improve your well-being, well, then you're in the right place. You'll hear the stories of professionals who have taken on big challenges while managing their energy and longevity through the ups and downs of pursuing their goals. Enjoy this episode, then head to the show notes to learn more so you can take the next steps to build the habits and systems you need to achieve your dreams.